figured I would make an adjustment on mine. So, I'm Ricardo Aguirre from Arizona. I know I've met most of you, the Arizona Hub. I think I want to start out by saying that I just love breaking things down to their fundamental parts. I'm a civil engineer that focuses on drainage, flood control, design infrastructure. And after hearing Will speak, I was reminded of a conversation I had with my uncle about 10 years ago. And he says, "What do you think makes the world go around?" And I caught off guard. I said, thought for a moment. I said, "I don't know, what, sex and gravity?" And he started kind of laugh a little bit. He says, "No, time and money." And I did not agree with him. And so for the next 10 years, I began to just kind of distill on that answer and like, what is it that really makes the world go around? And like Will, because of Alan's TED Talk and meeting Alan, come to the conclusion that it's photosynthesis. But really, before photosynthesis, it's actually water. Because the sun comes up every day, and we walk on 6 inches of soil, used to be topsoil for the most part. And so it's water, and actually that's the space that I operated in is water. And as a result, I started a company about 4 years ago called Holistic Engineering and Land Management that fundamentally focuses on water. Since he mentioned centralization of food, what I became concerned about is I began to question this fundamental reality that water really means life. What I was taught in college as a civil engineer, 2 degrees of civil engineering, and what I was taught to do is to centralize our most precious resource of stormwater. We put it in a pipe, a channel, or a hole in the ground. That's what civil engineers were taught to do. And especially in urban complexes, while the stormwater is running off into those 3 tools, it's collecting solvents, hydrocarbons, heavy metals, nutrients, and at the end of the day, when it goes into the receiving water, whether it's a river or a lake, it's a cocktail of toxicity. I was like, isn't that awesome what civil engineers have been trained to do? And here, I'm standing in front of you still wondering why I've been invited into this space of the Hub network. And as it is, I'm here. So that's a little bit of the background for the engineering company, which is not necessarily the Hub, but it sets the table for the Hub, and the Hub sets the table for the company. So what I did to start the company is I actually did create a holistic context, so I'll walk through that real quick. And it's basically to evolve the land development and land management industry to save the environment. I wouldn't really even call it land development in my profession because of what I just got done explaining to you. It's more land degradement is probably what I'd call it, unfortunately. But I'm wanting to reintroduce, not just in the urban areas, but also the rural areas of what, as an engineer, can we do to look at water differently, look at the way Mother Nature manipulated water, which was to fundamentally decentralize water, where every raindrop becomes useful where it falls. And that's not what civil engineers were trained to do. The quality of life statement that I have here is to insulate ourselves from economic uncertainty and be financially free. As Will indicated, we've got the sun coming up every day. I mean, how can you get more secure than a resource of free energy that comes up every day? It's just a matter of figuring out how to use those patterns and manipulate it accordingly. To be a role model, a leader, a pioneer in low-impact development, which is a new fancy term that's coming out for the most part. Not to disparage my competing consulting companies that are around me and throughout the U.S., but for the most part, it's what I would call lip service. And they don't really apply it. They put it on a response to request for qualifications and to get a job, and then they don't really deliver. The next item here is to operate with the knowledge that our health is directly linked to the health of the environment. And then this is kind of the former 2nd edition version of a holistic context. So the future resource-based people and land is probably the same as everybody else, but for me as an engineering company, the community is that we're looking for government agencies that recognize the need for land management services as an alternate to traditional engineering solutions. So that's really what I'm working on within Holistic Engineering and Land Management, is to develop a land management service line and to put forward services that were traditionally solved through centralization by engineering practices. I'm going to get into that a little bit in a moment. And then finally, a community, in terms of a future resource base, that has solved the tragedy of the commons. So many of you are probably familiar with what that means. And when I present, when I message, I usually look at a room that I'm in and I help the people visualize and walk through all the decisions that were made, like let's say in this room, from the paint to the duct work to the lighting to even the clothes that we're wearing, the carpet. And if we just look at the carpet alone and the manufacturing facility through the industrial age and the assembly line mentality of what it took to make this carpet and all the decisions and the carbon footprint that went to that manufacturing facility, decision upon decision upon decision in a linear, non-circular loop mentality to produce this. And with the good intention of creating a product for the marketplace. But in reality, somewhere downstream, all those decisions are having some adverse impact on somebody else. Thousands upon thousands of decisions within this room, if not millions of decisions within this room, are having adverse impacts. And for me as an engineer, that's what hit me as the most fundamental concern that I have in this world, that if we don't figure the tragedy of the commons out, we're going to continue to degrade to hell in a handbasket, if you will. And that's how severe I see things. And somehow, some way, we need to continue to amend and change and do a paradigm shift of how every common person, moment to moment, is making their decision throughout the day, unrealizing that it's having some adverse impact on somebody else somewhere downstream. And so that's largely, just heard some of my messaging. Before I move on to the plan, I just want to get into some of the projects that I'm working on. It's mostly government-based, so a lot of local governments, some of the cities, but in general I've got also state agencies that I'm working with. Some of you at the Sabre Institute have been emailing you with some of the activities that I've been working on. Currently, have just spoke to Matt before we got started here, that I'm in the process of writing a proposal to Yavapai County, which is kind of a county in the mid part of the state. They would like to have a demonstration site to use animal impact so that they can bring in ranchers and farmers, because they see essentially the message that I just got done explaining to you. It's with their flood control district, and they are commissioned to take on water quality as well. And so their overall concern is, how do we manage all that toxicity that I just that I'm explaining to you. And so they really like the message, and that's why they're bringing me on and hiring me to not, how can we centralize it and then put it into some kind of a filtration device that needs to be, once it's spent, removed and replaced, but how can we actually use animal impact to decentralize and clean that water? Not to mention to mitigate the runoff from a flooding or volume standpoint. I just got word last night from Cochise County that the funding that we got from the Walton Foundation is going to be moved to a bigger project. The project that I was working on was 480 acres, but this new project is 180 acres, and then I'm also working with the NRCS on a 200, and the same county, on a 2,800 acre site to do both a combined groundwater water recharge project as well as animal impact surrounding that facility to support a southern city called Sierra Vista in Arizona. Also working with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality to solve emissions from nitrogen-based fertilizers as well as dust. And so I'm also working on a proposal to do that. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the work that I've been doing as an engineer within this company to ramp up the land management service line. So all of that, the hub has generically been called the Arizona Savory Hub because it didn't have any creative hub. And I wasn't advanced as Abby and Spencer at that time with, a name and a vision and everything, but we are moving forward. So one of the goals this year is to actually decide to create a nonprofit, because the enormous opportunity for grants that exist out there. The state of Arizona just signed a drought contingency plan because Lake Mead is going to be meeting its what's called a Tier 1 threshold. So it's about, essentially, we're not going to be able to return from this elevation, this water surface elevation, which is, we're at about a foot from it right now. We go below that foot, then we have to enter into a Tier 1 rationing, and that means that Arizona, Nevada, California, Mexico needs to start rationing the water. So we are wanting to position ourselves in the area of water security, and so the hub will have some kind of core focus of water security, which would be something like the Southwest Center for Water Security. I have not decided yet, but that's going to be what the goal will be, to establish a nonprofit and also go after grants as a nonprofit. I do want to expand the messaging platform and have started to do that. So one of the ideas that I've had is, as I've talked to Trey, I've spent a lot of time studying philosophical doctrines, and I know that the Greeks in particular used to open up schools of philosophy back in the day, and they would invite students to come in and teach them how to not mislive. And I see holistic management as a framework, not just to manage resources, but actually a way to live properly. So one of the ideas I had for the hub is to expand the messaging platform and invite people in, and as I give it the 10-day intensive training course, is to unpack some of that doctrine so that they're not just left with essentially a very good set of tools to manage resources, but also what are some ideas to manage one's life or one's decisions in life and so forth. Because I'm a design professional, I've got friends who are design professionals in other disciplines such as architecture, landscape architecture. And so this idea is to develop a hub that is very experiential, almost Disney-esque, if you will, even though we have a very small footprint of a half an acre. All these other projects that I'm attached to, we could have the opportunity to do that. In particular, where my mother is getting older and she's wanted to transition the ranch that I grew up on over to me, and that has a lot of great visibility right off Interstate 10 between Phoenix and Tucson. So their idea there is to create this experiential agro-ecotourism environment for motorists. In that location, there's about 50,000 travelers on average per day that drive by her house. Health and fitness is another interest, as I've had people come over for my tours. A lot of conversation has been going on about functional fitness, and health and fitness is something that I'm very interested in, and so I actually started a YouTube video or YouTube channel because people have been pressing me so much about, well, what do you mean by functional fitness and how does that work? And I was like, well, it's like a lot of shovel work and a lot of wheelbarrow and stuff. So anyway, so there's some of that on there. Going back to this school of philosophy, if you will, I felt like I needed to operate based on a certain set of precepts, and so I developed 3 precepts that we operate from, which is protecting the asset. And for me, the asset is this body and mind and soul that I'm operating on, and I want it to be functioning on the fullest potential that it has to offer. Advancing the species, of course, species is humans and everything within the ecosystem that supports us and how we support them. And of course, as I mentioned before, mitigating tragedy of the commons is a key precept that we want to focus on as an engineer and as a hub. Abby mentioned capacity, so we need to build capacity. One thing that I'm very concerned about with these engineering/land management projects that I mentioned is that we're about to hit a threshold where I need to very quickly figure out where I'm going to find either a contract raiser or reinvent myself to step out of the office, which I actually want to do as part of my goal this year, is to step 80% back into ranching the way we're trying to do it, and only about 20% back in the office and maintain engineering and do the contract. So that's my own personal goal to do that. there's an Australian woman that Abby put me in touch with. We're in conversations. Currently, she's in Japan, but she'd like to come to the United States in April. And so I've been talking to her a little bit about what this could look like, because I'm going to need somebody like her to help me manage all the projects that I have going on around the state, from Yavapai to, forgot to mention, Pima County. We're actually running goats right now in Pima County for managing invasive species, and we got a grant to do that. So it's a litany of symptoms of desertification that we're attacking as a firm, and I need to get this hub up and running so that we have the implementation components to complement the engineering theory that we're putting out there. Some of the other, so that's, I triple starred that, and that needs to be my main focus, is like, because I know come second half of this year, it's going to ramp up, and I won't be able to clone myself to be in multiple places at one time, and I'm going to need people that are actually managing animals, where I just go as kind of an observer and inspector to make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing. So gals like this gal from Australia are the kind of people I'm looking for. So I give monthly tours. I'm going to ramp that up again. I want to follow that up with monthly fundamentals of holistic management training to upsell the intensive training that I would like to give once a year. I'm in very active conversations with Arizona State University. They've asked me to come in, and they're looking at me being either a guest lecturer or a professor, adjunct professor. They're looking to actually, they've even had conversations about writing holistic management into their course program, syllabus, or whatever it's called. So, and that's it. So that's kind of what I've been up to at the Arizona Hub.
Just go.
Any questions? I think we're good.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to still absorb everything you said, which is amazing.
Time.
So like, there's some people at Arizona State that, are kind of looped in already, like Peter Pick. Do you know Peter Pick or?
Yeah. So I, in fact, just had a meeting at the School of Sustainability. Arizona State's really pushing themselves as the university. I didn't go there.
Right.
I'm saying what they're pushing. So.
Right.
So I met a gentleman at the school, and so he knows Peter, I know Peter, and so that's somebody that a lot of the local governments who are aware of, as well as the state agencies. I think there's a big interest in engaging Peter and not doing maybe something like he did at Will's or Gabe Brown's Soil Carbon Cowboy, but something that maybe can document a transformation over time is the conversation that has been explored. And I have not had time. I need to find the time again this year to reconnect with Peter and explore those.
And then, my colleague Jenny, she did a postdoc in the School of Sustainability at Arizona State.
Oh, she did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where we got her from.
Okay.
So she's a good contact, for that school.
Yeah. We should talk about that in addition to helping me with these projects and the EOD stuff, which, I think should be on the list. So. Anybody else?
Thank you, Ricardo.
Yeah.
Who's next? Ruben, let's do it.